Welcome to our Parent Connect event. Everybody good? You know, my name's Al Causey. I'm Debbie's husband. That's what I'm famous for here. So, thank you. I'm not sure if that was for me or for Debbie, Cortland, but I'll take it. But anyways, so we're so happy you're here tonight, and I just want to say a couple things. First of all, we got people watching us on Zoom, so everybody give a big shout out. Say, hey! Okay, you can't see them, but they gave you a big shout out, okay? I know you can hear them, and it was a lot louder than you think because they're really excited you're here. But hey to our Zoom friends. But hey, we just want to let you know, this is a group and a special group we have here at our church because a lot of us, as we are parents of LGBTQ plus children, I was talking to a friend of mine, John, a second ago, and he said something that just rung in my ear because it reminded me when my son first came out. He's like, hey, I just want to do this right. You know, I just don't want to make the wrong step with my son. I don't want to make the wrong step with my religion, with God. I just want to do this right. And that's the whole thing that I love about Parent Connect, is that Parent Connect is a place where you can come and process how you feel, where you're at, where God is taking you on the journey. And at the same time, the thing I love about Parent Connect is that we are all here together to figure out one thing, and that's how to love our kids well. How to love our kids well. And you know, it's done in lots of different ways, and sometimes you can look back at your history, your short history, and say, man, I've messed up so bad, or I did it so wrong, but that's okay, because we're human, right? We all make mistakes. But the part about this is that this is a safe place where you can come as a parent and process it with other parents who are on the journey. And everybody's going to be in a different step of the journey. And we're not trying to force one people one way or force one people another way. We're not trying to change your theology one way, try to change your theology this way. We're just here to help you process where God has you on the journey. And we're here to help you figure out how to love your kids well. And so if this is your first time here tonight, our first time to our large group gathering, we're so glad you're here. I'm so thankful that you're here because that's a huge step in just trying to learn how to love your kids well. And tonight is going to be a special night because I've had the privilege of listening to Linda and Rob and got to watch their movie. So their documentary. She would say, I'm not a movie star, I'm a documentary. So who's seen the documentary that Linda and Rob done? For they know not what they've done, is that right? For they know what they do. Done was past it. Okay, so that's good. So you've got a crowd that not many have seen this, so that gives you a blank slate. So I get the privilege of introducing Linda. So Linda, come on up here. So Linda and Rob have been married together for 37 years. Rob is a firefighter and is amazing. We just been talking to him. And one of the things I love about them is they were telling me that they love to go double tracking. Does anybody here know what double tracking is? Okay, I didn't either. Thank you. I'm glad. Maybe they're from Seattle, Washington, and it must be a Seattle thing, right? Because us here in Atlanta. So explain to us what double tracking is.
There's actually not a thing called double tracking, but we like to cycle on wide paved trails where we can talk, and we will ride for 30 miles and just be like, blah, 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 talking. We can't ride on the roads because then you can't talk. You're like yelling over the traffic. So it's one of our favorite things to do. It's our happy place. It's be on our bikes. There's lots of trails in Seattle, like talking. He is my best friend, and I am so lucky to be married to that man. So, yeah, that's what we love to do.
Man, I don't need to say anymore. That gives enough introduction for Linda. So, Linda, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I feel so honored and delighted to be here. And on Zoom, too. Thank you guys for watching. I am not a professional speaker. I'm just a parent, like you. And so I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm going to dive right in. And our story is emotional. So forgive me if I read a little bit because otherwise I'll just end up crying and you'll be bored and, it won't be a good thing. So All of us are parents who have learned a truth about our children that we probably didn't expect and often weren't prepared for. And none of us, I would venture to guess, grew up in imagining our future children falling in love with someone of the same gender or wrestling with their own gender identity. We've all found ourselves seeking God to help with a challenge that we didn't see coming. And we've probably responded in all kinds of ways. And like all over the board. And that's like we're all asking God to help us in this unforeseen experience to love our kids as Christ loves us. And I'm here to share the story of how our family learned huge lessons about what it really means to do that very thing. And before I get going, I'm going to move this so I can see my notes. And there we go. All right. So I'd like to tell you 4 of the most significant stories from our family's journey, because what we learned from them has dramatically changed the way we view God as well as the way we parent. Every time Rob and I remember those stories, we are reminded of how much God passionately loves every one of us. Not in spite of who we are, but because of who we are. His precious, beloved children with whom he is greatly pleased. Period. No buts, no conditions, just because we breathe. We call these stories the choice, the letter, the hotel, and the hospital. And we'll start with the choice. On the night of November 20th, 2001, a conversation over instant messenger changed our lives forever. Our family of 6, with 4 kids between the ages of 9 and 14, were celebrating our oldest daughter's birthday. I had run downstairs to finish wrapping up a last-minute present when our 12-year-old messaged me from my office, where I was, from the computer in his bedroom. Here is an exact transcript of how it went. We were completely shocked. Not that we didn't know and love gay people. My only brother had come out to us several years before, and we adored him. We knew the gay couple down the street and loved that our kids were friends. But Ryan, he was unafraid of anything, tough as nails, and all boy. We had not seen this coming. And it was one thing to have a gay brother and gay friends. Having a gay son felt completely different. We still felt a great deal of love for Ryan, but the emotion that overwhelmed us kept us awake at night, and sadly influenced all our reactions over the next 6 years was fear. We said all the things that we thought loving Christian parents who believe the Bible, the Word of God, should say. We love you. We will always love you. And this is hard, really hard. But you know what God says about this, so you are going to have to make some tough choices. We love you. We couldn't love you more. But there are other men who have faced this same struggle, and God has worked in them to change their desires. We'll get you their books. You can listen to their testimonies. We love you. We are so glad you're our son. But you're only 12 and your sexual orientation is still developing. So please don't tell anyone you're gay. Your identity is not that you're gay. It is that you are a child of God. We love you. Nothing will change that. But if you're going to follow Jesus, holiness is your only option. Since you know what the Bible says, and since you want to follow God, embracing your sexuality is just not a choice you can make. We thought we understood the magnitude of the sacrifice that we and God were asking from Ryan. We were sure that this sacrifice, though difficult, would please God and would lead him to the abundant life that the Bible promised. We thought we understood what was at stake, that it was simple. Either Ryan chose to obey God by remaining faithful to God's commands, or if he did not, he would be choosing to walk away from God and into a world that would lead him to wild living, promiscuity, drugs, and ultimately hell. The prospect of Ryan choosing wrongly was absolutely terrifying, and that fear transformed us. It wasn't pretty. Suddenly, he found himself with a mom and dad who asked no questions and spent no time listening to his thoughts and feelings. Instead, we overwhelmed him with reading materials we had printed off the internet. We made strict rules about computer access. We installed filters and became increasingly vigilant about monitoring what he was doing, who he was talking to and texting with. And the 12-year-old who had regularly poured his heart out to me at night before bed, who had instant messaged me to confide that he was gay, stopped talking to us at all. At the same time, Ryan still desired to please God above all else. So after his initial resistance, he began his own campaign. For the next 6 years, he chose Jesus. Like so many other LGBTQ kids, he pleaded with God. He begged God to help him feel attracted to girls. If Ryan was anything as a young kid, he was determined. And so he threw him into the effort with everything he had. He memorized scripture, he met with his youth pastor every week, went to all the youth group events and Bible studies. He got baptized, and he filled prayer journals with his desperate pleas. Books with titles like "You Don't Have to Be Gay" became manuals that he and we lived by. Ryan dove into counseling to further discover the whys of his unwanted attraction to other boys. He invested even more deeply in his friendships with other guys, straight guys, just like the reparative therapy experts, pastors, and spiritual leaders advised. He even came out to his entire youth group, giving his testimony before over 100 teenagers of how God had rescued him from the lies of the enemy, and sharing by memory verse after verse that God had used to speak to him. For his 17th birthday, the thing he wanted most was to go, along with Rob, to the Exodus conference in Indiana, a large gathering of Christ followers from all over the country who wanted desperately to please God with their lives, despite living with sexual orientations and gender identities that seemed to make that goal almost impossible. Rob and I, too, did everything we could to help Ryan seek holiness and healing. We read all the books about how we might have influenced Ryan negatively, and we took the recommended steps. Rob intentionally pursued Ryan, doing the things they both loved: snowboarding, hiking, and riding the scariest roller coasters they could find. I withdrew a bit, making sure that Rob was the primary parent and the one nurturing an intimate connection with our son. And we prayed. Oh, how we prayed. We wanted to be like the woman in the parable who keeps bothering the judge so often that he finally relents. We longed to wear God out so that he would finally have pity on us and answer our prayers to remove the unwanted same-sex attractions from our son and replace them with desires for girls. We made binders, seriously, of scripture prayers for every day, and we put them by the toilet so that every time we went to the bathroom, we would lift Ryan up to Jesus using God's own words. We had a whole team of confidential prayer warriors, too, who were all committed to pleading with God on Ryan's behalf. And God constantly reminded us of his presence and faithfulness. He was clearly hearing our prayers. Our faith in God's intimate involvement in our lives grew to an extent we had never experienced before. Except, nothing really changed. God didn't answer Ryan's prayer or ours for the thing we all desired most. We all believed with great faith that the God of the universe, the God for whom nothing is impossible, could easily make Ryan straight. But he did not. Though our hearts may have been good, we truly thought what we were doing was loving. We did not even give Ryan a chance to wrestle with God, to figure out what he believed God was telling him through scripture about his sexuality. We shielded Ryan from any liberal Christians who believed that being gay was okay, even his own uncle, my brother. Ryan didn't know any gay Christians, only Christians who used to be gay when they were away from God, when they were walking in sin. We had believed firmly in giving each of our 4 children the space to question Christianity, to decide for themselves if they wanted to follow Jesus. We wanted them to truly own their own faith. But we were way too afraid to give Ryan that room when it came to his sexuality, for fear that he'd make the wrong choice. Basically, we told our son that he had to choose between Jesus and his sexuality. We forced him to make the choice between God and being a sexual person. Choosing God, practically, meant choosing to live a lifetime condemned to being alone. As a teenager, he had to accept that he would never have the chance to fall in love, have his first kiss, hold hands, or even hope to share deep intimacy and companionship. Ryan grew up in a home where his parents were not only husband and wife, but lovers and best friends. We had always told our kids that marriage was God's greatest earthly gift, but Ryan had to accept that he alone would not be offered that present. And so, just before his 18th birthday, Ryan, depressed, suicidal, disillusioned, and convinced that he would never be able to be loved by God, made a new choice. He decided to throw out his Bible and his faith at the same time, and to try searching for what he desperately wanted: peace, another way. And the way he chose to try first was drugs. We had unintentionally taught Ryan to hate his sexuality. And since sexuality cannot be separated from the self, we had taught Ryan to hate himself. And so as he began to use drugs, he did so with a recklessness and a lack of caution for his own safety that was alarming to everyone who loved him. He started with weed and beer, but in 6 short months was using cocaine, crack, and heroin. He was hooked from the very beginning, and his self-loathing and rage at God only fueled his addiction. Shortly after, we lost contact with him. For the next year, we didn't know where he was or even if he was still alive. The only way we heard from Ryan was when he broke into our home to steal things he could sell for drugs. I started every day by logging on to our county's jail registry, hoping to see his name. Though it broke our hearts to see our son, the same one who had been in gifted programs at school and who had never gotten into any trouble, being arrested for theft, domestic violence, and possession of illegal drugs, we were always glad when he was in jail because at least we knew he was safe, if only for a few short nights. Months would pass without seeing his name, and we'd be plagued by the thought that he had died. We did receive one letter during that period of time, but I'll tell you about that in the next story. Our support mostly came from a group of Christian parents who also had children who were struggling with same-sex attraction, as we called it then. We'd gather to talk and pray, and at first we found a lot of hope and comfort from those friends. But as the months went on and we hadn't heard from Ryan even once, their complaints about having to meet their children's partners began to rub us wrong. While we longed for any communication at all, some sign that Ryan was alive, they had what seemed to us the luxury of having their child over for dinner. Yes, with a same-sex partner, but still, that idea for the first time began to sound really good to us. As those awful, agonizing months wore on, God got our full attention. Our fear of Ryan someday having a boyfriend, a possibility that it honestly horrified me, seemed trivial in contrast to our fear of our son's death, especially considering his recent rejection of Christianity and his mounting anger at God. So we stopped telling God what we knew he should do, and we started listening. We stopped praying for Ryan to become straight. We started praying for him to know that God loved him. We stopped praying for him to never have a boyfriend. We started praying that someday he'd have a relationship with Christ again. And then, after more than a year of silence, Ryan called. Mercifully, by that time, God had completely changed our perspective. Because Ryan had done some pretty terrible things while using drugs, he started the conversation with 3 questions. Mom, do you think you and Dad can ever forgive me? I told him, of course, he was already forgiven. He had always been forgiven. Mom, do you think you and Dad could ever love me again? I told him that we had never stopped loving him. Not for 1 second we loved him more then than we had ever loved him. Mom, do you think you and Dad could love me with a boyfriend? And crying, I told him that I could love him with 15 boyfriends. We just wanted him back in our lives. We just wanted to have a relationship with him again and with his boyfriend. And a new journey was begun, one of healing, open communication, and grace. Lots of grace. And God was present every step of the way, leading and guiding us, gently reminding us simply to love our son and leave the rest up to him. The Holy Spirit brought new meaning to scriptures like this one. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Period. No buts, no conditions, just because we breathe. And over the next 10 months, we learned to truly love our son period. No buts, no conditions, just because he breathes. We learned to love whoever our son loved, and it was actually easy. What I had been so afraid of became a blessing. The journey wasn't without mistakes, but we had grace for each other, and the language of apology and forgiveness became a natural part of our relationship. As our son pursued recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, we pursued him. God taught us how to love Ryan, to rejoice over him, to be proud of the man he was becoming. We were all healing, and most importantly, Ryan began to think that if we could forgive him and love him, then maybe God could too. As a young teenager, Ryan had committed his life to Christ, had chosen to be baptized in front of his peers, had fervently followed Jesus and tried to please him for years. But he had left home full of shame and guilt, sure that he was beyond redemption and God could ever truly love him. So he ran away from God and everything and everyone connected to him, as far and as fast as he could go. But looking back, during that whole time, no matter how many times Ryan declared that he was no longer a Christian or how much he intentionally rebelled against God, God kept chasing after Ryan. God was jealous for Ryan. God didn't go after him because he was gay or because he had a boyfriend, but simply because God was crazy about Ryan. Our God is a God who pursues us and delights in us. Our God is a compassionate God. He was moved by Ryan's pain. God loved Ryan, period. No buts, no conditions, just because he breathed. God taught us this in a way that changed us forever. And to do that, he used a letter. So I'm going to back up a bit to tell you the story of the letter, the most grievous, hateful letter we've ever received. It was the fall of 2007, and it had been about 6 months since we'd heard anything from Ryan. As you can imagine, we were worried sick about his whereabouts and his well-being. And then after we tried to reach out to him through a public defender, and we didn't hear or see from Ryan until we got an email. And it was the first message we'd had from him since the day he left. I want to read you a few excerpts from that letter, and you'll understand why in a bit. Linda and Rob, your attempt to show me love and support was extremely rude of you, as you obviously couldn't put yourself in my shoes enough to realize that the fact that I haven't made contact with you might mean that I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't know if you are just that thick-skulled and I should pity you, or if it's just the fact that you've miserably failed at understanding and supporting me my entire life, and you will always continue to do so. Your claims of love and affirmation are more vile than any drug I have ever shot into my veins. I don't want your poison, which is all you've ever offered me since I was born. Unfortunately, I was so sheltered that I never knew there was any better. I have a new family now who have cared for me more than you ever have in my entire life. You are nothing but burnt memories of the past which fade more and more every day. F you, F your false God, and stay the F away from me. In closing, remember that every time you whimper my name in prayer, I curse you with every ounce of my heart, soul, spirit, and mind. Please don't respond to this email, as I have no interest whatsoever in anything you might have to say. Talk about hate mail. It feels vulnerable to share that letter with you. It doesn't at all reflect Ryan's heart or his true character. But what it does reflect is the depth of his pain, his rage, and his despondence in the face of our rejection and the agony of drug addiction. But at the time, it hurt like nothing we'd ever read before. Our son had disowned us, told us we were no longer his family, cursed us, and said he hoped we would die. For the next year, lines from that letter rang in my head, and I was convinced that we wouldn't ever see Ryan again. Okay, on a much lighter note, we're going to move on to the hotel story. We'll revisit the letter story in a minute. So when Ryan had called that day to find out if we would forgive him and if we still loved him, he also wanted to check himself into a rehab program. So we planned to have breakfast together and then drive out to a rehab on the other side of Washington State. However, the boys shot up one last time before Ryan planned to quit using forever. So instead of going for pancakes, we all ended up in a Seattle ICU. Now, keep in mind, we were parents who used to think that the very worst possible thing in the entire world would be for our son to even have a boyfriend. And here we were, spending an entire week in one very tiny hospital room with Ryan and his boyfriend, with the boys often cuddling together on Ryan's bed. At one point, I looked at Rob and whispered, "Is this freaking you out?" And he said, "No, not a bit. You?" And I was able to answer with complete honesty, "Nope, I'm doing fine. What in the heck? We were just so thankful he was alive. And we were together." After Ryan was discharged from the hospital and we were on the road, we found out that the rehab facility wouldn't have a bed available for Ryan until the next day. And just as soon as Rob and I started discussing what hotel we should stay at, Ryan was always money conscious, so he chimed in and told us that he and his boyfriend would gladly sleep on the floor so we didn't have to pay for 2 rooms. So Rob turned around in his seat and said, "Ryan, your mom and I have been hanging out in your hospital room for almost a full week. Unless you want to put up a curtain and use earplugs, you guys are going to have your own room." I just laughed because that kind of conversation is typical of our family. But then inside, I started to panic. So the next time we stopped for gas, I pulled Rob aside and I hissed in his ear and said, "Rob, if our friends find out that we're getting a hotel room for his son and his boyfriend, we won't have any friends anymore." Rob, totally calm, said, "Well, yeah, we know what people would say, but what is God telling you?" I was like, "Oh yeah, God, we're all good. I feel totally fine with God." And Rob just smiled and nodded and said, "Me too." And then, I don't remember who, but one of us said like, "Wait, what are we worried about? They're probably not going to get any gayer." So, for the first time ever, we rented adjoining hotel rooms for our gay son and his boyfriend. Until then, we wouldn't have considered doing this for any of our unmarried kids. Not that the boys spent much time in their own hotel room. Ryan, who was 19 at the time, plopped himself right between Rob and I in the middle of our bed and proceeded to show us his current favorite movie till well past midnight. We finally said goodnight and they headed next door to their own room. But at 6:30 the next morning, we heard a knock on our door and a quiet voice calling, "Daddy, Mommy, can I come in?" Our son, who had spent the last year and a half on the streets of Seattle doing whatever he could possibly do to get his next fix, simply wanted his mom and dad. So we continued to bond with Ryan's boyfriend over the next month by listening to the audible versions of the Twilight series while we drove back and forth each weekend to visit Ryan in rehab. We got to know his boyfriend and focused on reconnecting and reconciling with Ryan. If someone had called us out at the time and asked us why we were, for all intents and purposes, condoning Ryan's relationship, we would have only been able to say, one thing. God had told us just to love Ryan. We couldn't have won any theological debates, but we knew that our Lord had spoken clearly to each of us. And loving meant actions, not words. God forced us to search our own hearts and to surrender all the things that kept us from trusting him and simply obeying his call to love Ryan. He impressed upon both of us the need to prove to Ryan that he truly was loved unconditionally. And in our situation, that included renting the boys their own hotel room and doing long road trips with Ryan's boyfriend while listening to vampire romance novels. So before I start the final story, I need to tell you about something that happened during the year that Ryan was in recovery. About a month after he got out of his first 30-day rehab, he had a minor relapse with major consequences. He ended up in the ICU again after his roommates found him early one morning having seizures. None of the doctors could explain why, but when Ryan regained consciousness, he was profoundly deaf. The doctors also informed him that he had tested positive for Hep C and that he had some permanent brain damage. All of the news was devastating, but none more than the fact that he had lost his hearing. To say that losing his ability to hear was devastating to Ryan is a huge understatement. And yet, during the next year, he called me almost every day. Mom, I'm just calling to check. Do you remember how much I love you and Dad? I don't want you to forget how grateful I am to have you as parents. We were far from affirming. We hadn't changed our theology at all. And this is kind of off script, but at that time, my only brother, who is gay, and Ryan had knockdown, drag-out arguments about whether we really love Ryan or not. And my brother said, no, we didn't, because of our theology, what we believed. And Ryan argued, yes, they do. And I'll just stop there for now, but to tell you that for those of you who don't know what you, theology-wise, you're struggling, man, I couldn't be more grateful that we put that aside to just love Ryan. So on June 30th of that year, almost exactly 10 years after Ryan had called to reconnect with us, we hadn't heard from him for over 2 days. And that was a little weird. But that's where the hospital story starts. We did get a phone call, but it wasn't from Ryan. It was from Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, asking us to come identify our son's body. Ryan had made the classic mistake of a recovering addict. He got back together with his friends, his old friends, his using friends. And one evening that was supposed to be a night at the movies turned out to be the first time he had shot up in 10 months. He had been unconscious for well over 48 hours, but his friends hadn't called 911 until just that afternoon. The very first thing the doctor asked Rob and I was whether or not Ryan wanted to be kept alive on life support. The next day, we learned not only was Ryan unconscious and unresponsive, but his organs were failing, and they suspected severe brain injury, among other things. The doctors told us they didn't know if Ryan would ever wake up again. As Rob and I stayed by Ryan's side, hundreds of people were praying. We spent our time just praying over Ryan, talking with him and singing to him, in spite of the fact that he was deaf and in a deep coma. We all felt like God was literally carrying us through each day, giving us strength and courage when we had none. During this time, the thing that scared me most was the fact that Ryan hadn't reconciled with Jesus. I was afraid that Ryan might not go to heaven if he ended up dying. I told Rob about my fears, and he encouraged me to ask God for confirmation and peace. Within 24 hours, God sent me a message, loud and clear, 3 times, using a hospital chaplain, a close friend, and one of our pastors. First, I heard, Ryan is God's child. Second, Ryan will never stop being God's child. And third, nothing Ryan has done or could ever do could ever change the fact that Ryan is God's beloved child. After 8 days, our medical team called us in for a meeting in which Ryan's neurologist explained that he had spent the last several days consulting with specialists all over the country. He contrasted pictures of Ryan's brain taken the year before, after those seizures that I told you about, with scans taken right after this overdose. He explained to us that the heroin had caused massive, catastrophic damage to all the areas that control higher level brain functions, as well as to Ryan's brainstem. The whole medical team cried with us as they told us they recommended discontinuing Ryan's life support. They cried, we cried. Like, it's impossible to describe that moment. They told us they wouldn't do anything at all until all of our kids could come and everybody could say goodbye to Ryan, but that we should start preparing ourselves for his death. And the next morning, the nurses came in to remove Ryan's ventilator and get it ready to move him to the hospice to die. If he didn't die right away, they were going to move him. So Ryan was still able to breathe on his own. This is him that morning, and because his brainstem was partially functioning, and you can see him kind of staring. He was blind. He couldn't move, and he just kind of stared into space. They call those doll's eyes because they're just kind of glassy. They're like doll's eyes. And but the special team had been sent to move him, and this team consisted of an RN and an EMT. And the EMT was this big guy named Al. And at Harborview, they always speak to, and most hospitals, they always speak to people in comas, or if it doesn't matter, they can be on their last breath. They keep talking to them. And so Al, the EMT, was moving Ryan, and so he said, as he moved him from his bed to the gurney for transport, Al said to him, "Ryan, buddy, you doing okay?" And suddenly we heard this voice say, "Yep, 100%. It actually took us all a few minutes to realize it was Ryan who had spoken, because no one was expecting someone who was essentially brain dead to speak. My stomach did a tower of terror. Rob's knees buckled. We heard everybody gasping. One of the nurses dropped his tray of instruments. People came running. And down the hall, it was like chaos. And soon, Ryan's nephrologist and his neurologist ran in, and they kept talking with Ryan, and he kept responding. They asked him his name, and he said clearly, "Ryan Robertson." They asked if he was in any pain. Ryan said no. Rob then asked him, "Ryan, what do you want?" To which he calmly replied, "That is a complicated question." His nephrologist looked over him and said, "That is a complicated answer." When Rob and I told Ryan how much we loved him, he responded by clearly saying, "I love you too." One of the funniest things he said that morning was to his youngest sister. After he had taken a swallow of water, she had praised him by saying, "Good job, Ryan." He immediately asked, "Are you being sarcastic?" We were all incredulous as she replied, "Of course not. You've been in a coma for 10 days. And I'll never forget Rob asking him the question that he always asked our kids every night when he tucked them in. Who loves you the most, Ryan? Our beloved and previously deaf child promptly and confidently responded, God does. His hearing and his speech were the only signs that he had woken up. He was still blind, and he could not move anything other than his mouth. Ryan's doctors then called another big meeting to figure out what they were going to do with Ryan, since none of them had ever heard or seen anything like this ever happening, particularly with the severity of Ryan's brain injury. So after quite a long discussion and some spirited arguments and some fantastic female doctors who stood up for Rob and I and Ryan, they decided to put him on what they call comfort care, which is basically as much food and drink as he wanted and anything that would make him more comfortable. They told us that they didn't know if Ryan would die or if he would spend the rest of his life as he was, blind and completely paralyzed. They said that Ryan's body would make that decision, which for us translated to God would make that decision. We were actually able to relax a bit and just soak up being with Ryan for the first time since he was admitted to the ICU. We came to realize that we'd been given sacred time, and Ryan's room felt like holy ground. Ryan called each of us by name and obviously knew that we were there with him. He laughed when we read him a funny letter that one of his old friends has written to him. And he even made a Beyonce joke when his older sister was talking with him. One of Ryan's nurses encouraged us to take lots of pictures. And so even though it felt weird at first, we did. And we are so thankful. On the morning of the 17th day, Ryan seemed fine, and his doctor came in early to encourage us to start going home at night, and he was like, Linda and Rob, you've been running a sprint. This is going to be a marathon. You guys have to start going home. You need to take care of yourself. This is going to be a long road. He believed firmly that Ryan would likely outlive us. So their plan was to move Ryan that day to a long-term care facility. But instead, Ryan suddenly became sicker and sicker. Rob told me that he thought Ryan would probably die that day. So it was like we had all had masks and gowns on the whole time. So I'll never forget Rob saying, pull off your mask, pull off your gown. We're going to hold our boy. And Rob just held Ryan in his arms, reassuring him, telling him how much we loved him. And once our other kids arrived, Rob told him that it was okay, that we were all with him, and that we knew we'd see him again, that he could go to be with Jesus. And 5 minutes later, at 4:55 on July 16th, 2009, Ryan David Robertson took his last breath in his life. And the first in the loving presence of his Creator. The only explanation that makes sense to us for all the inexplicable, miraculous things that happened during those 17 days is simply this: the extraordinary, wondrous love of God for us and for our son. The fact that Ryan hadn't reconciled with God did not matter. The fact that he had rejected God did not matter. The fact that he was gay and having sex with men did not matter. During that time, the only thing that mattered was that God loved Ryan. So now, back to the letter story. In the months after Ryan's death, I was not only grieving intensely, like nothing I've ever experienced before or since, but I was really wrecked by the thought that I might never see Ryan again. I really struggled with whether or not Ryan was in heaven, especially considering the fact that he had announced publicly that he hated Jesus on his MySpace page. Now, MySpace didn't exist when I was growing up, and obviously it doesn't now either, but I could pretty much guess that posting that you hate Jesus on any kind of page in any kind of space would have gotten you a ticket straight to hell, according to the theology I was raised with. I just wasn't able to silence the old voices in my head saying that Ryan hadn't come back to Jesus, that he had committed the unpardonable sin, et cetera, et cetera. These questions were plaguing me. But one afternoon, as I was waiting in the Starbucks drive-thru line, God spoke to me as clearly as if he were sitting right next to me waiting for his latte too. Now, I am not one of those people who typically hears God's voice, but in that moment, I did. And just like when Ryan called home, God had some important questions for me. I heard God say, Linda, when Ryan wrote you that vile letter, cursing you and telling you he despised you, did that ever change your love for him? Oh, I was like, of course not. Not for even a millisecond did we stop loving him. Like, what? Then he was like, Linda, when Ryan told you that he never wanted to see you again and that you were no longer a part of his family, did you ever think that he wasn't your son? I was like, no, of course not. Ryan's always been our son. He'll forever be our son. Linda, when Ryan said and did all those hateful things, did you ever struggle for a minute to forgive him? Again, no. It was never even a question. He was already forgiven. Linda, do you really think you love Ryan more than I do? That you're a better parent than I am? Do you really think that I am going to stop loving him because he was angry and hurt and he lashed out at me? You didn't stop loving him for a minute, and your love for Ryan is only a tiny reflection of how great my love for Ryan is. So, sitting in that drive-thru line with tears pouring down my face, for the very first time, I was overwhelmed with gratitude for that awful letter Ryan had written us. Because through it, God helped me to see that there was nothing Ryan could do or not do to stop his unrelenting, never-ending love for Ryan, or for me, or for you. When Ryan died, we lost the ability to love our gay son because we no longer have a gay son. What we wished for all those years, prayed for, hoped for, that we would not have a gay son, came true, but not at all in the way we used to envision. When I think back on all the fear that governed all my reactions during those first 6 years after Ryan told us he was gay, I cringe as I realize how foolish I was. I was afraid of all the wrong things. I grieve not only for my oldest son, who I will miss every day for the rest of my life, but for the mistakes that I made. I grieve for what could have been had we been walking by faith instead of by fear. But in addition to all the grief, and all of my regrets, there has been and continues to be so much of both. I also have the deepest peace and hope I have ever experienced in my life. And most of that is all because of what we learned through Ryan's life and what we learned through his death. Because of these stories, we've come to a place where our goals and desires are no longer about our kids. They are about us. They are about the things that we can control. So, no matter what they do, no matter what our kids say, no matter what our kids believe, we have committed to be the things that we wish we had been for Ryan. We want to be the people that don't preach, don't lecture, don't give advice without being asked. Instead, we want to listen, and we want to listen some more. We want to put away our agendas for our kids' lives and instead be supporters of their own dreams. We want to stop caring about what people outside our immediate family think. When our children come to us with hurt or angry feelings because of something we've done, we will bite our tongues when we are tempted to defend ourselves, make excuses, or insist that our actions weren't intentional. Instead, we want to humbly listen, validate their feelings, and ask for forgiveness. And we'll remember that their honesty and courage to share is a sign of love. When they don't feel loved, we won't insist that they are loved. Instead, we'll ask them why they don't. And again, we'll humbly listen and learn. We want to set aside all of our expectations for them to make us feel good. We want to remember that people learn by making mistakes and even by suffering. So we want to be there when they do, without panic, without judgment. We want to be on their team, always. We want to be in their corner permanently. We want to be their safe people, irrevocably. In every interaction with our kids, we want to reflect the truly scandalous, endless, extravagant, unrestrained, and actually truly unconditional love of Christ for them. Period. No buts, no conditions. Just because they are ours. Just because they breathe. Thanks for letting me share our story.
We're going to start. We have some questions. Hopefully you got to turn in your questions. And we're going to do our best to answer these. Now remember, the reason we have you write these down is because we often write a question that really can't be answered in 30 seconds, And so just to start off, it's really important for you to know that is what Parent Connect is all about, is to be support for one another and answer these very questions over time through best practices and different things. So they're going to do their best to try to answer some of these. Some of these are hard questions.
We like hard questions.
Yes, they're good with that. But also know that if we don't answer your question, they are available afterwards because they maybe think some of these are good one-on-one questions too. So we'll get started.
Which mic do you want? Oh, thanks. If they haven't written down their question and they end up thinking of one, or we dialogue, like today with NorthPoint staff, it was pretty amazing, the dialogue. So we want to invite that too. And please don't feel like there's anything you can ask or say that will hurt us. Like the people with a dead child, like you can't say anything, you can't ask anything, you can't put like.
And at the same time, we want to acknowledge that it's awkward and it's scary. Like, what do you say to the parents of the dead kid? It's a really intimidating thing. But we're offering open hearts to have this conversation. So you have a permission to step into this sacred space and join us in our brief.
And you honor us by doing that. So thank you.
Okay. All right, let's get started. When you say, don't tell them they're loved when they say they're not, just listen. Wait a minute. When you say, don't tell them they're loved when they say they're not.
Yeah.
Just listen, and then listen some more. Then what?
Okay, so that's a really good question. And this is what I mean by that. Well, two things. First of all, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I have some family members that constantly tell me they love me, but they haven't asked about my life in years. They don't know me. They don't know what I feel. They've never cried with me. It's somebody that it's someone that has just been really disconnected through the death of my child. But they always say, we love you so much. We love you so much. But I don't feel loved. And when I've tried to do conflict resolution and say, I don't feel loved, they get very upset and they defend. And they say, but we've loved you. We've done, and they make a list. And we call it a resume. They bring out their resume and they start listing all the things they've done to love us. That doesn't make me feel loved. What would make me feel loved is if they said, oh, you don't feel loved? Tell us more about that. What if they said, oh, you don't feel loved? That must feel really bad. Silence. Nothing else. I would be like, oh, it would feel like such a gift if they said, oh, we're so sorry, we've missed you somehow. Tell us how to love you better. I would be like, oh, could you ask about my heart? Could you ask me what my grief looks like now? Could you ask me what is exciting me in my life? Ask me what I'm passionate about. And then listen and don't interrupt and tell me about yourself. But instead, they insist all the time that I'm loved. I don't feel loved. So we've tried to take that lesson and swap it with our adult kids. If that makes sense. And one of the things, Rob and I are going to do this really quick thing, I think, of when your kids are messy, because some of you may have kids that are angry and hurt and wounded. And believe you guys, we had 3 other kids through all this time. They got kind of screwed over, excuse my language, during that time. We were there in body. We were so afraid for Ryan that especially for the 2 that were younger than Ryan, our heads weren't in the game. Our hearts weren't in the game. They got missed. They were adolescents during those years. And so they both have a lot of pain over that. And we've had to do a lot of humble listening. So we've gotten a lot of practice at not defending ourselves and validating our kids. And the reason we do this is we want relationship with our kids. We want to love them well. And every time they come to us to tell us their anger, they are moving toward us in such a beautiful way. So do we want to do that or do we want to wait? What do you think?
If you're game, I'm game.
Okay.
So do you want me to be Larissa or Ryan or Riley? One of them that had an angry moment. Yep, they all had.
You choose one. Whoever you feel like you can channel the most. Okay, we have one that's really angry and hurt with us right now in our lives, so this isn't hard for us to do.
You want me to start?
Go for it.
Do we really have to talk about Ryan again?
every time this comes up, all I remember is how you let him beat up on me and do nothing. And now you're treating like he's a hero?
Oh, crap. Thanks for calling me out. Okay. What? Tell me more.
Easy for you to sit there and say that now, but where were you when I needed you when he was shooting darts at me? What am I supposed to do with that? Am I supposed to be all lovey-dovey for Ryan's memory now?
No, you're right. That is like, you're right. We dropped the boat. We screwed up. We screwed up, Riley. You have every right to be so mad.
Still don't know what to do with all my anger, because it seems like everybody just wants to talk about what some hero Ryan was.
Thank you for telling me how it feels to you. It just really sounds shitty. Is there anything I can do in small steps to work on this?
I guess what I want is for everybody to just acknowledge that our family's more than Ryan's story. And it feel good to see some of the just less of Ryan and more of all of us that are living.
Yep. Oh, man. I am so glad you told me that. I really need to think about it. I need to pray about it. And I need to take this really seriously. Thank you for trusting me.
You say that now. I'm just pissed, but I need some time.
Okay, and then I think one of the hardest things, you guys, is that when your kids need time and then they separate from you, like, I don't know if any of you are like me, but I'm like, I want to make it better. I want to go, and right now, let's fix this because I don't want to miss you. And yeah, and sometimes we can't. We're going on a year without seeing our youngest son while he's in therapy, and it hurts. But the thing is, I don't know if you guys talk about this at NorthPoint, but there's this concept. Our oldest daughter's a psychologist, and she taught us this concept about moving toward, moving away, and moving against. And
in any relationship.
In any relationship. So if in marriage, if we have a conflict and I say to Rob, you made me feel like an idiot tonight when you did that. That's like, how dare you do that? You always do that to me. That's moving against. I'm expressing my feelings. I'm doing it by a kind of an attacking statement. It's moving against Rob. But if I say, hey, babe, I'm like kind of unsettled about something that happened tonight, and my feelings are hurt. Could we circle back and talk that through? Now, he might think, oh crap, I did something wrong. Or like, he might be like,
I did it again.
Yeah.
How about our next bike ride?
Yeah, or he might be like inside, oh, bummer. But he recognizes I'm moving toward him. I want to repair. I'm moving toward. And when our kids, especially our queer kids, and our young adult kids, when they move toward us, a lot of times it's very messy. Teenagers, it's very messy when they move toward us. Sometimes your kids will be you're their safe person in life, so they will attack you when nobody else. But they are moving toward you because they want a relationship with you. So for me, knowing that has caused me to take a deep breath and go, they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't want me in their lives. So that's moving toward. Now, moving away is like if
Here's the car ride home, and you're sitting there with your arms crossed, looking out the window.
Yeah.
I'm going like,
And then
it's a little chilly in here.
Yeah. And then when we get back to the hotel, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going straight to bed, babe. And I keep it inside, and I never repair that. I never tell him what he did. That's moving away. So I think, especially with trans and non-binary kids, when we screw up their pronouns, if we don't understand something that's going on with them and in their process, we can hurt them. And I know from close friends, they can feel so hurt, and their moving toward can look really messy when we screw up. But we are the parents. So we can, I remember a therapist saying to me, Linda, you are strong enough. And he kind of looked at me and was like, you know that Christ loves you. It was like he kind of said, pull up your big girl panties and buck up and be the mom. And because your kids, let your kids be messy. Be strong enough. Just know you're loved and let them be the kids. And I think that goes no matter how old we are and how old our kids are. We're the kids. So
It's never fun, but we're able to tolerate the pain. And that's just part of parenting that we need to lean into, I think, if we're going to communicate that we love them no matter what.
Yeah, in private, you can go, are we having fun yet? Because this doesn't feel like fun.
No,
right. Or here at Parent Connect, right? This isn't fun. But let your kids be messy. And a lot of queer kids didn't get to be messy when they were young. So sometimes they're really messy later.
Thank you. So let's jump to this question. It's a little different. How has your experience impacted your relationship with your brother?
Our relationship's great now, but only because I've cried a lot of tears and had to humbly ask forgiveness.
It goes for both of us that we've had some real heart-to-heart conversations with Don, and he's been a really gracious receiver of our sincere apologies and regrets in how we responded. And yet, at the same time, he gets that we were responding in our fear, and we thought we were doing the loving, right thing, and it just was super hurtful to him.
And I think that's another illustration of the conflict resolution piece, where we had to be willing to sit in that discomfort of Don telling us how much we hurt him, a lot.
Just fully own it.
And not make any excuses and not tell him. But we thought that, because my brother is... really part of the reason we did it was because my brother we felt like he had walked away from Jesus, and we didn't want that for Ryan. And so it would be easy for us to say, but we thought that you had walked away from Jesus. Do you know what I mean? And defend ourselves. But that doesn't repair a relationship when you defend yourself. So we had to just shut our mouths and listen to his pain, listen to his anger, listen to that and own it. And I feel like I didn't do a good job on the role model, but oh well, role play.
Spontaneous.
And the role play. But I hope you're getting the feeling of just owning it and asking questions and owning it some more.
Two of these are similar. What advice would you give the parents of a preteen who has recently identified as LGBTQ? And then, how do I guide my 15-year-old who says she is a boy? I think these are big questions.
Yeah.
Can we split that into two?
Sure. You can not answer them as well.
I'm glad to. I just want to make it more bite-sized, so to speak. But if a teenager is coming out,
Preteen.
Preteen, at any age, I believe that we need to ask questions. We need to find out where their head's at, how long they've been thinking about this, what their thoughts are, because they've been probably wrestling with this for a long time.
Except that the one caveat to that would be that some kids don't want to be they don't want to be asked, right? Some kids are like, don't pepper me with questions. I don't think that's not what you meant
No, not pepper. No, I just, instead of what we were tempted to do was tell Ryan what he needed to do instead of asking him about his experience and listen to his heart. That's what I'm trying to communicate.
Yes, exactly. I think the biggest thing is, so this is what I wish. I'm going to read you guys something. I think Debbie's going to give you a copy of this, but I was asked the question, like, if I had to do it all over again, what do I wish I would have said? And I would love, there's parts of me that says I would love to say, oh yeah, I wish that, that being gay is wonderful and we're going to throw a party, but that's not who I was. And that's not realistic given like our convictions and our beliefs and our values and what Scripture taught. So what I could have said without changing or compromising our faith is this: Ryan, I love you. I can't thank you enough for trusting me enough to tell me more about who you are. To be honest, I feel scared. But please know that you are our priority here, not how Dad and I are feeling. You are more important than what people at church think. If we have to find a new church, we'll do that. I have a lot of questions, Ryan. It may take us some time to figure this all out, but what isn't in doubt ever is that Dad and I love you endlessly, and we want to continually make sure that you experience that love in a practical way. Since you've been keeping this heavy secret for a while, and that is too much of a burden for any 12-year-old to carry, we do want to hear when you're ready of what it's been like for you. I know that we need to listen way more than we speak, and you have our permission to call us out if we start lecturing. The core of our faith is the truth that God is love. He embodies love, and He loves us unconditionally. So we promise to actually believe that as we walk through this journey together. We've been taught all our lives that the Bible says that God does not bless same-sex relationships. But we do want to have open hearts, listening to the Holy Spirit, admitting that it's possible that we could be wrong about this. We'll stay humble and teachable, values that you've heard us talk about 1,000,000 times in this family. And if we forget, throw a red flag and remind us not to be hypocrites. I am determined to have your back no matter what. Dad and I, we're going to remind ourselves that nothing has changed, Ryan, really, except that now Dad and I, we have the honor of knowing you more deeply. And you are absolutely precious to us. But tell me how that, can I ask? Tell me how that hits you. Is there, for those of you guys, is there anything in there that you feel like, oh, I couldn't say that? That'd be compromising to say that. Or does anybody have, if you have pushback, feel free. Because I think that's the way we grow, how we grow and learn.
You can have my microphone.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads to this question. Maybe that'll help. Oh, Al was going to say something. Surprise!
No.
I always say to Al after these, I'm like, stop asking so many questions. His questions are always the hardest ones.
I was passing the
Okay,
mic.
good. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm going to move toward you.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was wrong. That's my fault. I was completely wrong. I called that wrong.
Wow.
You're the
a lot
greatest.
of lessons right there in that exchange. What you said was beautiful and eloquent. How in the world would you be able to come up with that in the moment
Right.
when you needed to? So,
Yeah.
And that's what this kind of all does, is it starts to plant things like those kind of thoughts in our minds rather than the ones we would otherwise have. But
Totally.
I don't know how in the world you'd come up with that at the time.
No, you're right. That's a really good point.
You think of that as a menu, and you can like pull phrases off of that.
But I think you're right. Like, and even when Ryan initially came out, I didn't blast him, right? Like, I didn't blast him there. But I think what I really, like, you're right, I wouldn't have come out with this at the time. That's so true. I was like, man, I was almost fainting, literally. I was so panicked. But I think it's the only time I've ever experienced what physiological shock is. And I'm sure that's what I had. It was like, and I didn't keep food down for at least 48 hours. I was so scared. But I think this is the position we wish we had taken. I wish we had taken the position of, we're in your corner. We'll figure this out. We have your back. Instead, we just bombarded him, and we went to other people and got all these resources that fueled our fear, and we just sent them all on to Ryan. It just made him feel terrible, and it fueled our fear. So it was just not a good cycle. And we forgot. I think when fear hijacks our brains, we forget. We're not thinking clearly. So I think one thing I'd say is that if you're in the fear place, the best thing you can do is take care of yourself. Come here, listen to other people, take deep breaths. Really, and if you have people in your life that are fueling the fear, maybe turn the volume on that down a little bit for the sake of your kids. And come hang out get to know Renovist people. Listen to their stories, learn. I so wish we had done that.
So one of the blessings each of you have is a blessing I had about 7 years ago when Noah came out. Jeremy, who's here somewhere, and Amy and I went to a conference and heard them speak and tell their story just very soon after Noah came out. And I just realized tonight in listening to your story that is what put me on the fast track to loving my son and not focusing so much on my theology. So the reality of that, and I never even realized that. I've told people for years, for some reason I was put on the fast track, and I really think it saved Noah's life because he was in such a depression and sometimes suicidal. And I never put it together that because I listened to your story, I didn't want to repeat what had happened with you guys. And so that's such a blessing to us.
Thank you.
And I think it can be a blessing to each of you guys because you can look and say, this is what can happen if we focus on the wrong things.
Yeah.
You couldn't say anything more honoring to Ryan.
Yep. I think we modeled that Christ that we had conditions for Ryan. So then all of us, like, he could not believe that God had all kinds of conditions for him. And our stance did nothing to draw Ryan to Jesus. But when we put the stance aside and just loved him, that was what changed. That's when he started to go. And like, I remember saying, it was Father's Day in June, right before he died. He asked to come to church. And you remember what he said?
He had written on me a letter. And he also said, I am pretty comfortable with what's being taught. I think when you guys were scribbling.
Oh, that's right. When we were making notes during church, he came. And then that's the day he said, and he wrote you in the Father's Day letter, like, the thing about, if you guys have loved me, then I'm beginning to believe God could. Beginning to believe that I'm not out. Like, he began to move toward God and did ask to come to church and asked, like, and even if I just think it's so important. I know our spiritual director, our psychologist always said, parents are, in our children's minds, we represent God, whether they know it consciously or not. So our love for them is going to communicate how Christ loves them. So I think that's the whole thing here, it's just all about representing Christ's love to our kids.
Sandy, did you want to say something?
I did. First, I'll just start by saying thank you. I mean, your vulnerability and the bravery it takes to speak to a group like this and be completely transparent and raw, it's very meaningful. And so I think I could probably speak for everyone in this room in saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. It makes a huge difference. But, also we will take your story and we will share that with other people. So, that lesson, it just continues to be shared in the number of people's lives that you will save by doing this and just thank you.
So honoring, thank you.
My question was, I think we've all had our first reaction to our children.
Totally.
And no matter where we started on our journey and how accepting we were, I know personally I said things that I shouldn't have said, and I would do that differently if I had it to do over. If someone is in the middle of this right now, what would you say to them if they've said things after hearing you that they would like to take back? Because I'm sure, number one, it's never too late, but it's also probably not right to go home and say, hey, look, I hurt some people, and now this is where I am. Well, how would you recommend that we approach that?
I'm moving toward, I'm starting to think differently about this subject, and I think maybe I have a lot to learn. Just humbly admit that.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Humbly admitting it, I think it's always great. Instead of sweeping something under the rug, if we all said terrible things. Most people. Some people didn't. Some of you guys got it, but a lot of us, right, have said things we regret to our kids. Really, queer or straight, But I think the best thing you can do is to go back and say, I realize I said some things that were probably hurtful, really hurtful, and that I wish I could take back. If you are ever wanting to tell me how I hurt you, or tell me the things I said that were most painful for you, or that made you angry, I'm here to listen. Some of your kids will be like, oh yeah, I'll tell you right now. Others will be like, and some of the ones that won't talk, I'll speak from experience as a parent who screwed this up. They won't talk because they know you'll defend yourselves. And they know you'll make excuses. And they know you'll invalidate their feelings. Because that's what our brains do. That's what our tendency is. But if you say, I promise, when you're ready to share, you can do it in writing, you can do it face-to-face, you can do it over the phone. I will not defend myself. I will not make excuses. I just want to listen. And your anger, your pain, it's all valid. I'll just listen. And if I do defend myself or make excuses, call me on it. Because I don't want to do that anymore. And I'll tell you guys, doing this approach has transformed our relationship with our kids. And even the one that is not in relationship with us right now, because he's doing his own work, his own therapy, he's said, Mom and Dad, I love you. I need space right now. I know you'll be there when I'm ready. I know, and he's like, I know you're willing to go to therapy with me and let's validate this. I know. So just give me time. When I'm ready, I'll come back. Okay, we have to be okay. We respect that. So if this has been transformative for us in our relationships with our kids tell us all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's such a cool thing. And even this morning when one of them was texting us, I looked at Rob, I'm like, this journey we've been on, this one that you guys are on, this can be the greatest gift. It can transform your relationships with your kids, in your marriage, with all your kids, if you let it. Because it can teach us how to be better parents. For us, it's changed our lives for the better. I'm not saying, you guys know what I mean. I'm not happy. We're not happy. Ryan died, but he did.
But we have a deep sense of joy.
Yeah.
Even with the sorrow that's real and present, there's an equal measure of joy in our life.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a miracle.
And it's redemption to see God use all these mess ups that we did and to have him teach us and grow us and have him wake up. I'm really glad he woke us up. I think we would have lost more than Ryan.
Okay, and here's another thing that I think is really important, and I think that I've come to believe that I'm going to be the best parent if I'm fully convinced and living like God really does love me unconditionally. If I know that I'm beloved, then nothing's at stake with my kids, and I don't need them to prop me up in any way. And I can be fully present for them when I know God loves me, and I'm holding that truth. And so therapy.
Yeah.
We are lifers. We
Yeah.
have a therapist that we love, and he's also lost a child to suicide, and we're blessed to know him. So it's just ongoing, and there's
Yeah.
more to know about how we're put together in this human experience and who God is in it and in us.
Right. And Debbie and all the therapists in this room don't get, you're not like going, yep.
I don't get like payment.
No. But yes,
No.
therapy is good because then you're doing your own work and you're taking that pressure off your kids. You're getting your own, you're taking care of yourself, and you're not expecting your kids to take care of them, them to take care of you, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Hey, we have one more question back here. If
Yes.
that's okay. And then
For Linda and Rob, I really just want to reinforce what you guys just said. And thank you, because, and I'm build on what Debbie said. I'm the father of a transgender daughter, and we were in a really bad place relationally with our daughter. And the ricochet off of what you said, Debbie, is our connection to Amy. And we had breakfast with Amy, I remember that, and that it changed our lives, and it changed
Yes.
the relationship that we have with our daughter in a way that probably enabled us to sidestep what you ended up going through with your son. So thank you.
Yes. That's
Oh,
beautiful.
that's great. And man, you guys have a great resource in the run of his team here.
Well, we're going to close because we're past time. But like I said, they'll be here for a few minutes after. And of course, we're here for you guys and your groups. We have groups, if you're not in one, are here as well. So thank you again. You guys join me in giving them a big hand.
Thanks. Thank you guys.